Yassas. Welcome to Greek Like Me, the podcast about all things Greek. I'm your host, Pamela Diodes Wood. Email us at stealthgreek@gmail.com to share comments, questions, and stories about Greek's Greekness or your own ethnic background. Listeners have been asking what's going on with the irregular schedule for episode drops, and why the ones dropping are sometimes late. I've been dealing with some health issues, working my way back. I lost my voice for the last couple of days, so this episode is dropping late. But we're persevering because that's what Greeks do. We have so many stories to tell. Today's episode is one that couldn't wait. We're talking about the history, customs, and rituals of the centuries-old tradition of Anastenária. Trigger warning for young listeners and animal lovers. There are brief references to animal sacrifice in this episode. In honor of the feast day of Saints Constantine and Helen, which just passed on May 21st, we're exploring the most unusual celebration in Orthodoxy, a 3-day festival devoted to the saints that culminates in a firework over burning coals. I knew nothing about this until I saw an article in Greek Reporter, and neither did any of the Greeks I asked. Anastenária comes from the Greek word Anastenazi, meaning to sigh. The word Anastenária means sighs, kinda. While dancing and firewalking, devotees are said to moan or sigh. The Greek word anesti, meaning rise or risen, as in the resurrection of Christ, has also been cited as a root word, perhaps referring to the rebirth of those who devote themselves to the saints. Scholars since the 19th century have insisted Anastenária is an ancient practice traced back to the wild rituals of the followers of Dionysos, Greek god of wine and debauchery. Many of today's researchers think those earlier scholars spoke too soon or had hidden agendas. There may have been firewalking in ancient times, but in the 19th century, it seems Greek leaders were anxious to tie classical Greece to contemporary traditions at a time when too many European colonialists were questioning whether the 19th century Greeks were even Greek. By the way, they were. And we are. It's been proven by scientists tracing modern Greek DNA directly to our ancient Greek ancestors. Demetrius Karatas, in his book The Burning Saints, believes the links to Dionysos is a false construction, and that those making the claims linking Anastenária to the cult are outsiders who've never visited the festival or spoken to the practitioners. Over the years, practitioners called Anastenárides have been accused of paganism, even Satanism. But really, they're devout Orthodox Christians who otherwise closely follow the traditions and tenets of our religion. Firewalking is rooted in a miraculous event experienced by their ancestors in Traki, in the village of Kosti, in the mountain region near the Black Sea called Stranza, in what is now southeastern Bulgaria. One night in Kosti, in the year 1250, the church of Saints Constantine and Helen caught fire. The villagers ran from their beds barefoot and stood helplessly outside of the church and watched it burn. A groan came from inside. Some heard faint cries for help. There was a frantic search for missing villagers who might have been trapped inside the church. After everyone was accounted for, the people realized it was the sacred icons calling for help. A handful of brave souls ran into the burning church to receive them. When they came out unharmed, their bare feet untouched by the flames, the icons in their hands undamaged, it was called a miracle. Those who'd rescued the icons were chosen to be their guardians. When the church was rebuilt, the icons were placed back inside, but the rescuers often kept them in their own homes, especially in times of danger, like the many raids and attacks Kosti suffered over the following centuries. The icons and the responsibility to keep them safe and well cared for passed down through the generations. It was and is a hereditary responsibility. Every year since, the miracle is commemorated during the festival of Saints Constantine and Helen by Anastenárides walking barefoot through burning coals with the icons in hand. Paul G. Brewster, who witnessed the Anastenária in 1977, says they do this believing they will escape unharmed if they are steadfast in their faith. Believers vow to perform a task for the Anastenária, whether it's walking on coals, preparing the ritual fire, cooking communal meals, cleaning, even stirring the ashes of the ritual firewalk grounds to keep the fires going. The descendants of the believer who makes the vow is honor-bound to continue to fulfill it. Be careful. Don't make a vow you or your descendants can't keep. It will hang over your head and punish you. And now I'm thinking I owe St. Phonutius a couple cakes or 10 for helping me to find so many things. I will honor my vow. The firewalk is a show of gratitude, a way of binding themselves to St. Constantine, who they believe protected their ancestors when they rescued the icons, and will continue to protect them as they honor him. The Anastenárides believe they are called by the saint, sometimes through illness or misfortune. When they approach the coals, they are seized by the saint, almost possessed by him, as they go into a trance and perform the ritual unharmed. The devotion to St. Constantine, and by extension his mother, St. Helen, is rooted in the miracle in Costi. But these are saints of supreme importance in the Orthodox Church. Constantine was founder of the Byzantine Empire in 330, shifting power away from Rome to Constantinople. He was a pagan, although his mother was Christian, and he became emperor of a vast land where Christianity was a tiny minority religion, relentlessly persecuted by his predecessors. Constantine was all about religious tolerance and allowed Christians to practice their faith openly. He even converted close to the time of his death, but he's seen by the Orthodox as a defender of Christianity at a time when most wanted to see the new religion stamped out. Constantine's title, Defender of Christianity, led to another story about the origins of the firewalk, including when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453. The Turks had set fires around the walls of the city to trap the people inside, and it said Constantine appeared there. After surveying the scene, he went inside the palace to retrieve the true cross, the cross that Jesus was crucified on, that his mother was believed to have found in the Holy Land during the 4th century. Carrying the cross, he stepped into the fire, extinguishing the flames with his footsteps, creating a path to lead citizens of Constantinople to safety. The fall of Constantinople came 200 years after the church fire of Costi and the annual Anastenária celebration that followed. But it's a great story and could only have further inspired the Anastenárides. Costi and the other villages of Thrace were a mix of Greek, Bulgarian, and Turkish populations in what became a repeatedly disputed region over the years. The Ottomans seized the area in the 14th century. Russians and Ottomans battled over it during their wars. Much of Eastern Europe and Asia Minor had had Greek populations going as far back as Hellenistic times. Greeks lived in these regions for many hundreds, even thousands of years. The Balkan Wars of the early 20th century meant more chaos, as Balkan countries grabbed back land from Turkey and later battled over the division of that land. After the First World War, Thrace was divided between Greece, Bulgaria, and Turkey. In 1923, the population exchange between Greece and Turkey took place. Greeks were expelled from territory they had lived in for countless generations. Many of them were victims of ethnic cleansing. Another story, but one that influenced the world view of the Anastenárides. When they were displaced from Costi, they lost everything but their sacred icons, which they carried with them as they traveled from one refugee encampment to another, finally settling in eastern Greek Macedonia, mostly in the 5 villages of Ayeleni, Lagadas, Miliki, Kerkini, and Mavrolepki. There they practiced their traditions mostly in secret, for fear of condemnation from their neighbors and from the Greek Orthodox Church. It's believed St. Constantine can both cause and heal an enormous catalog of illnesses and catastrophes. Bad experiences are often considered the wake-up call to serve the saint. Healing comes with fulfillment of that vow. As an Orthodox Christian, I appreciate aid coming from the saints. Lord knows I've asked them often enough, especially for Nudios when I've lost something. But I've always had a problem with the idea of illness and tragedy being caused by saints or by God. Put the blame where it belongs. Man ultimately causes that ish. God and the saints didn't attack Constantinople. It was the Turks. It wasn't God or the saints that attacked the Turks. It was the Russians. Let's be real here. Being an Anastenaris, or an Anastenarisa, if you're a woman, means devoting oneself to St. Constantine for life. It's a club you do not quit. Only those too old or too ill to participate are excused. All are expected to be good, ethical Christians. And during the weeks before the festival, as during the days of Lent, their behavior is supposed to be especially virtuous. Avoiding impure thoughts, showing kindness, sexual abstinence for 1 week after the festival. Those who don't obey the rules might find themselves afraid to walk, or if they do, might burn their feet, announcing their transgressions to all. The Anastenária has been performed without interruption for over 700 years. Anastenarides walk barefoot on coals as hot as 535 degrees Celsius, which is 995 degrees Fahrenheit. In the old days, they walked for St. Constantine and Helen, as well as other church feast days. But the responsibilities of Anastenarides went well beyond firewalking to guiding and helping the people around them. Sigaratas tells us the Anastenarides were considered to possess special religious knowledge, and their icons were believed to be miracle-working. The Anastenarides may see signs, have dreams or visions that lead them to the practice or enable them to advise those who come to them for help. They, quote, foretold the future and exposed thieves and other transgressors. I find that extremely cool. The Anastenaria icons were used to bring needed rain, protect crops and livestock, and even prevent natural disasters. They were trusted to bless new houses, ward off droughts and epidemics, but mostly to cure illnesses. By the mid-19th century, over 180 Greek Orthodox families participated in the original festival in Kosti. It lasted for 8 days and included the sacrifice of a bull at the start of the celebration. The meat was distributed to the families in the village. The skin donated to the poor to make shoes and other necessities. A huge bonfire was built to supply the coals for firewalking. In the old days, priests were involved in blessing the village wells ahead of the festival and officiating at the ceremonies. But that changed even before the move to Greece. The Church of Greece called the practice of Anastenaria pagan and forbade its priests from officiating. After that, the Anastenarides tried to find a retired priest of Thracian background. Otherwise, their leader, called the Archi-Anastenaris, performed the blessings. In eastern Thrace before 1914, there was no real medical care available. Like most rural villages, there were herbal practitioners, folk remedies, and in Kosti, the Anastenarides. Lauren Danforth, in his book Firewalking and Religious Healing, says they were consulted in practically all cases of illness and misfortune. The Anastenárians say, the saints were our doctors then. After the forced migration of the Kostelidis into Greece in the 1920s, medical treatment became increasingly available. The Kostelidis had brought their traditions with them to the villages on the outskirts of the largest city in northern Greece, Thessaloniki. But now doctors were consulted for illness. Anastenárians were consulted for those illnesses doctors couldn't cure, including mental health issues or the difficulties of everyday life. Reading about their core practices outside of healing and preventing disasters, I see mostly familiar Greek Orthodox religious traditions. First and foremost, the Orthodox reverence for icons, which we talked about in our 2023 episode, Icons and Orthodox Christianity. Icons are painted representations of the saints of our church, usually painted on wood, most often a size that can be easily carried or displayed in a church or private home. The Orthodox view is that these representations of people who lived and died for the faith are infused with their spirit. We talk to the icons, kiss them, ask them for assistance. They're intermediaries for the saints, who often act as our intermediaries with God. I can speak to God directly, but I can also speak to what the Anastenárians called the papudes, the grandfathers, the wise members of our Orthodox family who we can reach out to or can reach out to us. Just as we are supposed to act in the name of God with goodwill and kind acts toward others, because that is what Christianity is about, right? The saints can act on our behalf. Danforth says, in Eastern Thrace, icons were traditionally encased in a cloth covering, a unique feature of the icons of the Anastenárians. Those cloths are referred to as the clothes of the icons or the clothes of the papudes. I'm curious if any Greek Orthodox outside of the Anastenária tradition calls icons papudes. Something about it seems familiar to me. Please message us if you know anything about that. The procedure for creating the icons is also unique. A linen cloth glued to a wooden board is covered in plaster. The portrait of the saint is painted on top of this by the iconographer. If an icon is damaged, the iconographer removes the old cloth, glues on a new one, and repaints the icons. The old cloth may be glued to a new piece of wood and repainted. In this way, the icons belonging to the Anastenárians grow in number, each a descendant of the original. Every icon has the mark of the cross on the back and a handle for the firewalkers to safely carry them into the dance. Each icon is said to have a will of its own. It may cause its owner to suffer or have problems until its will is met, either by moving it to a more prestigious spot in the home, maybe improving their relationship with a family member, or by urging the owner to participate in the Anastenária. In the icons of St. Constantine and Helm, they are always depicted together, standing on either side of the true cross. These icons are believed to be imbued with the supernatural powers during the dance of the Firewalkers. They're able to perform miracles, which is nothing new to Orthodox Christians. The power of the saint is in all of their icons. Although some of those icons possess more power than others, the oldest are believed to carry the most power. The Patriarchate of Constantinople didn't approve of the practice of Anastenária. It officially opposed the practices, says Sigalatas, deeming them pagan. Even in Thrace, where firewalking originated, individual priests sometimes physically attacked the firewalkers, occasionally burning their icons, which is extreme and awful and sounds almost heretical. This is why Anastenárians kept their practices secret when they came to Greece. They knew they wouldn't be just regarded as strangers or as outsiders, but possibly as heretics. Back then, firewalking was restricted to the konaki, a special room for the icons, a sort of a chapel, usually attached to the home of the community leader. Anastenárians still performed firewalking inside during bad weather. The floor of the konaki is spread with mud or soil and manure, maybe clay, before coals are pulled from the hearth that sits inside every konaki. In the 1940s, the Anastenárides began to firewalk publicly. In 1947, they were condemned again by the Greek Church as pagan. Some called it idolatry, occasionally satanic. Sikalatas writes, religious leaders argued firewalking was presented as a miracle and that miracles can only occur by divine authority. But there are so many miraculous icons in Orthodoxy. And now I want to research those and do an episode about them. Strangely, money seems to have come into it around the same time. Donations were given to the Anastenárides for the upkeep of the konaki, carrying and repair the icons, the purchase of the sacrificial lamb, incense, candles, and so on. The local church said, according to Greek law, only it was supposed to profit from religious relics. Wait now, profit? Our churches are sustained by donations, but this sounds a little weaselly. Everyone has heard stories of certain priests from the Horio, because priests are men and some men are jerks. But Panagia, come on. In the past, certain priests or bishops showed disapproval that was beyond, denying Anastenárides basic sacraments. According to Sikalatas, in 1954 in Lagadas, they were refused communion, marriage, and baptism unless they signed an official document rejecting the practices of firewalking. This must have been intensely painful to a group whose devotion to their religion was often greater than many of their neighbors. In the 1960s, the Bishop of Drama famously seized the sacred icon of the Anastenárides of Mavrolevki, the oldest of all the icons of the Anastenárides, and stashed it in a chapel that subsequently burned down. Not accusing the bishop of this. Icons are sacred. The Orthodox practice of lighting oil lamps in front of icons has resulted in fires over the years. They have to be very carefully tended, which is why I keep an eagle eye on our home altar every time one of those lamps is lit. The Anastenárides of Mavrolevki couldn't celebrate the firewalk without the icon of St. Constantine and Helen. Villagers were reported to be suffering physically and emotionally because they were unable to fulfill their vows to St. Constantine. All of the Anastenária communities came together to collect money to pay for the restoration of the Mavrolevki icon. When it was complete, the bishop snatched it again. In a paper published in History and Anthropology, Sikalatas writes, in 1976, the Anastenária started legal procedures against the bishop. They asked for the help of the other communities to raise the money for the attorney's fee and finally managed to recover the icon. Then the bishop threatened to excommunicate them, and even anyone who would light a fire and jump over it, which makes me worry about the scouts. During the festival, he ordered the village church and the chapel of Constantine and Helen closed. In the 1970s, I believe it may have been the same persistent bishop, targeted Lagadas and tried to have all of their icons confiscated. And in 1970, the bishop of Ceres swiped the icons from the local church of Ayeleni to prevent the firewalk and got taken to court. Documents proved the icons of the Anastenárides were privately owned by the descendants of the families that brought them to Kosti, not property of the church. They were returned. During the 1982 festival of Saints Constantine and Helen, the bishop ordered the church bells in Ayeleni to ring all day, which I would think would only add to the festive spirit. Persecution of the Anastenárides continued through 1977, even though the bell ringing was 1982, when an Anastenaris wrote to the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, frustrated that the local bishop wouldn't allow him to marry in the church. The patriarchate and the Holy Synod of the Church ordered the bishop to allow the firewalker to marry in the church since, quote, firewalkers have never been excommunicated or detached from the church. This quoted from the Holy Synod of 1978. So that makes me think a lot of the persecution that was going on may have been unofficial. Just for fun, I have a few stories from the Sigalatas book that are part of Anastenária lore about what happens to folks dissing the practice. One says a priest in Costi took the sacred icons from the church. When the people saw they were missing, they asked the priest what happened, but he played innocent. Shortly after, the priest and his wife went crazy, strutting around Costi, naked, making sounds like chickens. When they returned the icons and begged forgiveness, they were healed. St. Constantine has a strange sense of humor. The next two stories follow the Kostelidis to Greece, where the bishop of Drama took the icons and found he was unable to speak. Maybe wishful thinking on their part. The last is the fate of a man who mocked the Anastenária. He was possessed by extreme fear, crying, and the desire to hurt himself. The doctors couldn't help him. Eventually, he became an Anastenaris and was healed. In interviews done by Danforth and Sikalatas, people spoke of others disrespecting the saint, either by making fun of the firewalkers or for saying they'd participate in the Anastenaria and reneging. Mishaps and illnesses were the result. When these poor souls fulfilled their vow to St. Constantine, their lives improved. Now, in Ayeleni, in the weeks before the festival, the village church is repainted. The pavements and public squares are cleaned. Municipal flags are replaced with new ones. Just before the festival begins, food stalls and vendors selling souvenirs set up. Even a small amusement park is assembled. In our capitalist world, once the firewalkers stopped being vilified, tourists began to flock to the Anastenária, and the town that initially shunned the firewalkers 100 years ago now makes coin off of their unusual religious practices. Pilot Guide's website focuses on travel and adventure. It has a small blurb on Anastenária at Ayeleni as an event worth taking in during travels. Their bullet points about sum up the monetization of the event while remaining totally ignorant of its spiritual purpose. And by this I mean, of course, the village making money off of it, not the members of the Anastenária communities. Quote, what it's about: walking on hot coals in a trance-like state and lots of feasting. Remember to bring bacon and eggs. I don't know what that last part is supposed to mean. I don't know. Pilot Guides goes on to explain about the Costi church fire of 2050 and explain descendants are believed to have the power of dancing on red-hot coals without suffering burns by holding the very same figures held by their forefathers. Figures meaning icons. Last I checked, there are still no hotels in Ayeleni. Visitors stay in private homes, tents, mobile homes, or their cars. Metal barriers are set to keep visitors away from the fire and the firewalkers. Some of those attending the festival from the outside are there to prove to themselves or to the world that the Anastenária is fake. It's not just tourists who attend for this purpose or in the attempt to understand how firewalking without harm is possible, but anthropologists, doctors, ethnologists, psychiatrists, scientists from all different disciplines, and reporters. They postulate the firewalkers run quickly across the hot coals so they're not hurt. Some do move quickly. I've seen the videos and we'll post them in the episode notes, but others march slowly around the coals or even stand still on top of them. Visitors have assumed the soles of the firewalkers' feet must be tough and calloused in order to protect them. Brewster points out, Greeks don't seem to have tougher soles than anyone else. He also wonders why the flowers decorating the icons brought into the field of fire don't wilt. I got chills right there. A 1984 New York Times article called Rites of Fire on a Greek Isle recounts a visit to Lagadas, which is not an island, by the way, New York Times. The author describes people dashing across the coals, stomping fiery embers, and a young woman picking up live coals with her hands. He reports that journalists observing the ritual examined the feet of the firewalkers, which sounds patronizing. And I know I'm being really pissy, but I get so mad sometimes when I read these articles or things posted in magazines or websites where people are just so, they look down on Greeks or other ethnic peoples and their customs, and it ticks me off. Anyway, so the journalists observed and examined the feet of the firewalkers, and the author of the article reported no evidence of burns. In fact, there were not even calluses. Thank you. Skeptics took off their shoes and jumped into the ceremony, which is really rude, and suffered serious burns. A number of unbelievers over the years have jumped onto the coals, interfering in what is a very spiritual expression of faith and devotion, just to prove it's all nonsense. Reportedly, all of these folks had to be carried away and treated for severe burns to their feet. Demetrios Ioannou more respectfully observed the Anastenária during his 2016 visit to the festival in Lagadas. He writes, "I tried to pay close attention to their faces. They showed no signs of pain. In fact, they seemed rather peaceful and calm." The home base of the Anastenárides is the konaki, from the Turkish word konak for residence or mansion. In addition to the icons, the konaki contains prayer candles, censers, and other religious items used during ceremonies, including what several researchers called samadhya, red kerchiefs or scarves handed out to the firewalkers by the Anastenaries before the ceremonies. Samadhi means sign or mark. It marks the wearers as Anastenarides. In his New York Times article, Ioannou calls them amanetia. Amaneti means pledge. The red scarves are considered sacred as the physical representation of the pledge to honor St. Constantine. Ioannou was also a photographer and gave us permission to post photos from his visit on our episode sources page on the stealthgreek.com website. They bring the ceremonies and atmosphere of the Anastenaria to life. The photo on our social media announcement is also one of his. Efkaristome, Demetrios. Interesting fact about the samadhya. Red kerchiefs or scarves were originally exchanged between the betrothed at engagement ceremonies in eastern Thrace. The pledges of monks, nuns, and priests are often compared to a marriage to the faith. The pledges of the Anastenarides similarly bind them in a lifelong relationship with Constantine. In the konaki, the samadhya or amanetia are draped over the shelves for the icons until the Archi Anastenaris offers one to each participant who places them around their neck. The icons on the shelves are adorned with coins, bells, and metal votives from petitioners of the saints. Oxford Languages defines votives as objects offered in fulfillment of a vow. The votives Greek Orthodox offer to their chosen icons or church are metal, shaped into whatever the petitioner is asking help with. Arms, legs, eyes, noses may represent an area of pain or ailment. There are tiny metal replicas of wedding crowns to bless a marriage, votives of fishing boats, tools of trade like wrenches or hammers. Whatever represents the thing a person is praying for help with can be offered. On the eve of the feast of Saints Constantine and Helen and Ayeleni, Danforth describes the Archi Anastenaris lighting the censer, approaching the icons and crossing himself 3 times, standard Greek Orthodox practice. He senses the icons and those in the room, the same way a priest would bless an Orthodox congregation, or someone would bless the family in front of their home altar. Everyone crosses themselves as they're sensed. The incense carries the prayers to God. Attendees are described as trembling or shaking, and some begin to dance in the konaki. Later, they tell stories of Anastenarides of the past, or those that have recently come out. Coming out is a big deal, because many still fear the stigma, how they might be seen by their neighbors, their workplace. Coming out is hard for everyone. In the evening, the church celebrates Vespers. The icons of Saints Constantine and Helen has been decorated in flowers, a Greek Orthodox tradition of honoring a saint on their feast day. Afterwards, there's a procession through the village led by the icon, along with musicians playing the drum and the Thracian lyra, a small wooden three-stringed instrument played with a bow. In some villages, gentes, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, gentes, Greek bagpipes are played, and maybe a tambourine. Villagers stand on their doorsteps with lit candles to watch the procession pass. The procession stops at the well. In Aielene, the well of the Anastenária is located inside of a small building at the bottom of a staircase leading to the water. The Archi Anastenaris goes down the stairs to the well and draws a bucket of water, making the sign of the cross over it in blessing, and pours it back into the well. This makes all of the water blessed. He draws another bucket, carries it up the stairs to the other Anastenarides, and throws water over their heads. I love it. Repeat 3 times. Now everyone is blessed. The Archi Anastenaris goes down to the well one more time and draws a bucket to bring up for the people to drink and fill small bottles with the blessed water. As Orthodox, we celebrate multiple feasts that are centered around the blessing of the waters. And the waters are for us to drink, to sprinkle ourselves and our homes, even our cars, to give us good health and keep us safe. The procession returns to the konaki, where there's more dancing. Early the next morning, the Anastenarides regroup at the konaki for the blessing of the icons. Simadi are handed out, and some of the members process to the butcher or shepherd they've contracted to for the sacrificial lamb. The villagers had collected money months before the feast day and chosen a black lamb. It has to be a black lamb. I don't know why. The lamb stayed put, continuing to nurse from its mother until the Anastenarides returned to collect the lamb on the feast day. On that day, the lamb is censed and blessed, and a red ribbon is tied around its neck. It's brought to the field where their firewalking will take place. A pit is dug, the lamb is sacrificed, the meat is distributed to every household. And that's all I'm saying. I'm combining information from different sources reporting on 2 different villages with slightly different practices. For instance, Lagadas apparently still sacrifices a young bull, as they did in Costi. Some villages firewalk each of the 3 days of the festival, some only 2. Other than this, I think the procedure during the 3-day celebration is pretty similar. The field where the ultimate religious ceremony will be performed has already been prepared. In the center, a tall cone-shaped pile of logs is assembled, and the fire's lit. When it's burned down enough, red-hot coals are pulled out and spread over the ground. The firewalking zone is 3 yards, or 2.7 meters wide, by 8 yards, or 7.3 meters, and over an inch deep. Siganatas tells us there are no formal lessons teaching the belief system or rituals surrounding the firewalk. Like their ancestors, all is learned through participating and watching. He says knowledge is shared through privately experienced or publicly observed events that are interpreted as the saints' attempts to communicate with their followers. Oral myths, legends, and other narratives are passed by word of mouth, end quote. There's no written text or tradition. The written traditions are solely the Bible and Greek Orthodox doctrine. The purpose of the Anastenária is to defeat the fire, as the original villagers of Costi defeated the fire that burned their church with the help of Saint Constantine and saved the sacred icons. Danforth says, for the Anastenarides, the firewalk is an act of faith, a miracle they perform every year that ritually confirms their belief in the existence and power of Saint Constantine. They compare themselves to soldiers fighting a battle. Quote, both enter the fire of battle, and both must display discipline and courage in a situation fraught with danger. The Anastenarides will move across the coals, with attendants constantly raking them over to keep the fire going, until all of the coals are stamped out and go cold. This is the victory over fire, the victory over adversity, the victory in faith. Afterward, there's a communal dinner of lamb in the konaki. Then the musicians pick up their instruments, and there are sad songs about burned villages, destroyed churches, and youths murdered by Turkish bandits. Generational trauma. Danforth believes that the practice of Anastenária is a ritual for powerless people who become powerful. On May 22nd, there's a second procession around the village. As the Anastenárides make their way around, they're greeted with handfuls of raisins and roasted chickpeas, and maybe a sip of ouzo. They stop by half of the homes in the village as they collect money for the saints. On the following night, the rest of the homes will welcome them. They enter some of the homes to greet the families and visit their icons. The Anastenárides say St. Constantine is the papu, visiting his family. They're offered the usual raisins and chickpeas, or fruit, cheese, sweets, coins, or sometimes a full meal. But the observances of the Anastenária aren't limited to the Feast of Saints Constantine and Helen, even if that is the high point. There's a ritual cycle observed that begins with the start of the Greek Orthodox ecclesiastical year. So I'm going to give a quick overview of this cycle, a year in the life of the Anastenária. October 26th, the beginning of the Greek Orthodox ecclesiastical year, is the feast day of St. Demetrius. The Anastenárides meet in the konaki to discuss preparations for the festival in May. Over the next few Sundays, they collect donations for the sacrificial lamb. In times past, when few people had actual money, grain, flour, oil, or other staples were offered. New Year's Eve is the eve of the feast day of Aios Basilios, a.k.a. St. Basil the Great. The Anastenárides meet again at the konaki and bless the waters of the well. There's music and singing. Then they cut the traditional vasilopita, the St. Basil cake, as all Greek Orthodox do. Then St. Constantine possesses the crowd, and they dance. January 7th, the day after Epiphany, the women clean the konaki and the holy well in preparation for the festival of St. Athanasios from January 17th to the 19th. The well is blessed, there's dancing, and then hot coals from the fireplace are spread over a layer of clay on the floor for firewalking. There are 2 days of processions visiting every home in the village, followed by more firewalking and a communal meal in the konaki. The first Sunday after the festival of St. Athanasios, a committee puts a down payment on the sacrificial animal for the Saints Constantine and Helen festival. The Archi Anastenaris visits the animal and offers him raisins and chickpeas and a bottle of ouzo. On the eve of Clean Monday, the eve of the first day of Orthodox Lent, the Anastenárides meet at the konaki, where younger members traditionally ask forgiveness from their elders and kiss their hands. This is a very old Orthodox tradition, asking forgiveness of those around you and showing humility. It's the perfect way to start the Lenten season. On May 2nd, the women are back cleaning everything in preparation for the festival. The festival of St. Constantine and Helen runs, as we said, from May 21st to 23rd. And the women are back to clean the konaki and the well. They are also constantly washing the clothes of the papudis, those cloth coverings for the icons. Where are the men when this is happening? July 27th is a feast day of Saint Pandalimon. A communal meal is served by the family guardians of the icon of that saint. Next is the August 6th celebration of the Transfiguration of the Savior. A meal is served by the guardians of the icon of the Transfiguration. Then, on August 15th, everyone from the villages of the Kostelidis goes to Ceres for the festival of the Dormition of the Theotokos, also called the falling asleep of the Mother of God. Kostelidis who migrated there in the 1920s are the guardians of the icon of the Virgin Mary. After liturgy, a common meal ends the cycle until the following October. I so enjoyed reading about the Anastenária. I could never step on a bed of hot coals, but I respect their faith and devotion. and how different people with different experiences express themselves and their love of their saints and their God. Danforth and Sigalatas' books have many more interesting anecdotes and stories about the practices and its followers. We have a list of articles and a doctoral dissertation on our sources page, including the article by Demetrius Ioannou, whose photos are must-see, especially for those unfamiliar with Orthodox Christianity. We'll link his article and his Instagram account in our episode notes. Our thanks again to Demetrios for giving us permission to post these beautiful photos. Thanks for listening. Greek Like Me is a Stealth Greek production. This episode was researched, written, and narrated by me, your host, Pamela Diodes Wood. Our producer, photographer, and post-production editor is Douglas John. The closing hymn to Saints Constantine and Helen is sung by the Saints Nicholas, Constantine, and Helen Greek Orthodox Church Choir of Roseland, New Jersey, directed by E. James Vardakis. May his memory be eternal. Visit our website at stealthgreek.com for resources, photos, links, and more. Please rate, like, and subscribe. It helps us get noticed so we can keep making content about Greeks and Greek culture. Find Greek Like Me on Facebook and on Instagram at Greek_like_me. See you next time. Yes.